Imagine leaving Earth, not metaphorically, not in a dream, actually leaving the planet, becoming the most famous human being alive in just 108 minutes. Now imagine this, from the moment you return, your life is no longer yours. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. The world saw a hero. The Soviet Union saw something else, a symbol. And in the USSR, symbols didn't get freedom, they got controlled. And what happened to Gagarin after space is more complicated than the legend we were told. The space race wasn't just about science. It was a war without bullets. The United States and the Soviet Union were fighting for dominance, not on land, not in the air, but in orbit. And when Gagarin orbited Earth in 1961, the Soviet Union achieved something historic. For the first time in human history, a person had left the planet. But that victory came with a price, and Yuri Gagarin would eventually pay it. A child of war, Yuri Gagarin was born in 1934 in a small village west of Moscow. His family were farmers, simple people. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, his village was occupied. His older siblings were taken for forced labor. Their home was seized by German officers. For a young boy, war wasn't news. It was daily life, cold winters, fear, loss. When the war ended, the Soviet Union was shattered, but rebuilding. And like millions of Soviet children, Yuri grew up believing one thing: the state was everything. Opportunity came through obedience, and loyalty meant survival. But he had a dream that didn't fit into farmland. He looked up at the sky. Airplanes fascinated him. The sky meant distance from hardship, distance from control. The making of a cosmonaut. Gagarin joined a flying club, then the Air Force. He was calm, disciplined, exceptionally steady under pressure. In 1960, the Soviet Union secretly selected candidates for a mission no human had ever attempted. Out of thousands of pilots, only 20 were chosen for training. From those 20, only one would go first. The requirements were strange: warm body size, perfect health, psychological stability, political reliability. Gagarin fit all of them. He wasn't just skilled, he was safe. Safe for the image the USSR wanted to project. Because the man who went to space would not just represent science, he would represent the Soviet system itself. 108 minutes that changed history. April 12, 1961. Inside the Vostok 1 capsule, Yuri Gagarin waited. The rocket ignited. As it lifted, he said one word: "Poyakali, let's go." The spacecraft reached orbit. For 108 minutes, Gagarin circled Earth. He saw the curvature of the planet, the deep blackness beyond the atmosphere. He later described Earth as beautiful, fragile, peaceful. From space there were no borders, no ideologies, no Cold War, just one world. But the mission was not without risk. The spacecraft had limited manual control. If something failed, he might not return. At re-entry, the capsule shook violently, communication briefly cut, and when he landed safely, the world changed overnight. The world's hero. Crowds flooded the streets. London, Cuba, India. He was welcomed like royalty. Children waved flags. Leaders shook his hand. He smiled constantly, but behind every smile, there were officials. Gagarin was never alone. Every speech was written, every interview monitored. He had become more than a man. He had become proof that communism could conquer space, and that meant one thing: he could not fail. Fame as a prison. Gagarin wanted to fly again. He was still a pilot, still ambitious, but Soviet leadership feared losing him. If he died in a normal flight accident, it would destroy their symbol. So they limited his flying, they protected him, and in doing so, they confined him. Imagine risking your life to leave Earth, only to be told you cannot touch the sky again. He attended ceremonies, political events, public appearances, always smiling, always perfect. But the weight of expectation grew, because in the USSR, even heroes were not free citizens. They were assets. The final flight, March 27, 1968. A routine training flight, in a MiG-15 jet. Clear skies, experienced crew. Minutes after takeoff, the aircraft crashed. Yuri Gagarin was 34 years old. The official explanation stated he made a sudden maneuver to avoid a weather balloon. But for decades, questions remained. Was another aircraft too close? Was there turbulence unreported? Why were details restricted? The Soviet Union released limited information, and like many things in that era, the full truth remained unclear. The first man in space became part of another mystery. Yuri Gagarin achieved something extraordinary. He left Earth. He saw humanity from above. He became immortal in history books. But his life after space reveals something deeper. In the Soviet Union, greatness came with strings attached. Fame came with surveillance. Success came with ownership. From orbit, Gagarin saw a borderless world. But back on Earth, he lived inside one of the most controlled systems of the 20th century. He conquered space. But he never fully escaped the system that made him famous. And that may be the greatest paradox of Yuri Gagarin. The man who touched the stars never truly belonged to himself. But there is something even more unsettling about Yuri Gagarin's story. Because after his death, the myth became stronger than the man. The Soviet Union did not allow doubt. They did not allow controversy. They did not allow imperfection. Gagarin became frozen in time, forever smiling, forever heroic, forever obedient. But real people are not statues, and the more the system tried to turn him into stone, the more fragile the story became. The man behind the symbol. Few people talk about what it must have felt like to be Yuri Gagarin in 1962. 1963, 1964, he was in his late 20s, already a legend, already history. Imagine peaking before the age of 30. Imagine knowing that nothing you ever do again will match that moment. The Soviet government celebrated him constantly, but celebration can be isolating. When you become a symbol, people stop speaking to you honestly. They speak to the image, not the person. And in tightly controlled systems, isolation becomes dangerous. Because you cannot complain, you cannot doubt, you cannot admit fear. Was he happy? We don't truly know. Official Soviet media always showed confidence, strength, pride, but personal accounts suggest something more complex. He was ambitious. He wanted to return to active flying. He pushed for more responsibility. He did not want to be reduced to ceremonies and speeches. Some historians argue that grounding him was necessary. Others argue it slowly suffocated him, not physically, psychologically, because the sky was not just a career. It was identity, and identity, when taken away, leaves a void. The system that creates heroes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Soviet Union did not create Yuri Gagarin's courage, but it did create his legend. And legends are useful. They unify people. They distract from economic hardship. They boost national pride. In 1961, food shortages still existed. Housing was still limited. But for a brief moment, none of that mattered, because a Soviet citizen had reached the stars, and that victory was priceless, which is why losing him later was terrifying. The sealed files. For years, details surrounding his crash remained restricted. Speculation grew. Was there another aircraft flying too close? Was there turbulence not reported? Was there pilot error covered up to protect reputation? In 2013, new information suggested that another jet may have forced Gagarin into a sudden maneuver, but the full picture has never been universally agreed upon, and that ambiguity fuels the myth, because when governments control information, mystery fills the gaps. The greatest irony. Perhaps the greatest irony of Yuri Gagarin's life is this: he experienced the ultimate human freedom. He left Earth. He floated above politics, above propaganda, above control, and yet when he returned, he lived inside one of the most tightly controlled societies on the planet. From space, borders are invisible. On Earth, they define everything. Gagarin saw both worlds, one boundless, one restricted. What his story really means. Yuri Gagarin's story is not just about space. It is about power. It is about how systems use individuals. It is about how symbols can inspire millions while quietly losing themselves. He was brave, he was skilled, he was historic, but he was also human, and sometimes history forgets the human part. Final reflection. When Gagarin looked down at Earth from orbit, he described it as beautiful. He said it felt peaceful, unified, small. Maybe that is why his story still resonates, because it reminds us that human achievement is extraordinary. But human systems are complicated. He went to space, he made history, he became immortal, but the question remains, was he ever truly free? And perhaps that is the most powerful part of his legacy.